Hey there, welcome to the Breakthrough Creative. I am John McDavitt, and this is the place where we talk about the business of art and the art of business. I, as always, am so glad that you are here with me once again. Would you please hit the subscribe button? For YouTube, if you're watching the show on YouTube, and or if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, will you subscribe there? That just helps us immensely to get the word about the show out. And I would encourage you to share each episode with the artist friends in your life. Today's guest is Keith Gordon of duostorytelling.com. Keith came to my attention through a mutual friend and actually a client of Keith's, Paul, a good buddy of mine who is a creative in his own right, who has written 2 books, and he needed some assistance from an editor, and that's how he got in touch with Keith. And so Keith helped Paul out, and I was talking to Paul one day. He said, "Dude, you have got to have Keith on your show. He is just an amazing creative. He's an editor. He's a ghostwriter. He has referred to himself as a story architect, which that's just a really cool title to begin with. But the dude knows his way around story, as you will no doubt learn in the interview that is just about to come up right now. I'm going to hand it over to myself and to Keith Gordon. For being here. You are my first writer, author.
Oh wow, I'm honored.
Yeah, and I'm honored. Thank you for coming here. We were connected through my mutual, well, friends now, right, and client at the time.
Yeah.
For Keith is my buddy Paul was writing a book, and he called on Keith to help him. So I'm going to hand it to you, Keith. I'm going to ask you, tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So nominally, my day job is working as a developmental editor, but I also am a ghostwriter and then an author as well. So I really cover the full spectrum of the written word. And so when I worked with Paul, I was working the capacity as an editor. So he brought his manuscript to me, and we were able to work very, very closely together. And it was a great experience. Paul's one of those people who you can just immediately tell that there's something special about them. I've worked with a lot of people on their novels, but Paul and I immediately clicked, and we could tell that, there was the professional side of working on the manuscript, but there was also this really wonderful friendship that started to blossom. And that's one thing that I love about my editing work, is that, when you work on someone's book, on someone's manuscript, it's a very personal experience. As you can imagine, this is something that in some cases people have worked on for years and years. So it's a very sort of intimate thing. And I think for a lot of authors, especially aspiring authors or authors who are going the self-publishing route, it's very tender, to sort of open the doors and let a stranger into their creative process, especially a stranger who is going to be editing and in some cases critiquing. It takes a big leap of faith on the author's part. And so it's I always treat it as a very sort of sacred relationship that forms. The relationship between an editor and author is very, very important. So I really try to create that space and connect with the author on a deeper level. But in some cases we finish up the project and then it's thank you very much. But in case of Paul, we've become very good friends.
Now, I want to ask you, how you got from there to here. But before I do that, just because we kind of got into it a little bit, criticism has been on my mind lately, and I think it's on my mind because I've been thinking about how I've grown as an artist and how I want to continue to grow, and how important criticism has been to me. And I feel like criticism is kind of the wacky uncle who comes to the holiday party, and he kind of, isn't necessarily thought of highly, but he's really important to the family.
Right. Yeah. He says the things that nobody wants to talk about, but it's but probably
right.
need to be talked about. Yeah.
Right. And if I can anthropomorphize criticism for a moment, I guess.
Yeah.
But when I think of criticism, the only reason why I've been able to work professionally with the longevity I've had is because of criticism. It's because of the critical eye that the people in my life who are for me and who know what they're talking about have been able to get through to me. And then even clients, whether I agree with them or not, with the direction they're going in, I need to be sensitive to that criticism. So I guess this is, now that I've set that up, I have two questions.
Yeah.
And the first is how has criticism benefited you? And then the second part is going to be, as an editor, as a ghostwriter, you're often well, I don't know, I shouldn't frame it this way, but I suspect you're often working with people where the work is very precious to them, and they may not be, they may not have like a lengthy career already under their belt where they understand the editing process. And so that tenderness that you talked about can be a challenge, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll address your second question first. There's a saying that I really like that sort of floats around the creative writing circles when it comes to the editorial process or to any sort of revision or rewriting process that an author undertakes. And that's to kill your darlings. And it's brutal, and it's very hard for aspiring authors to swallow, especially if they've been working on the same book for a very long time. But it's really, really important to be able to do that. And what kill your darlings means is to recognize that there may be things in your story or in any work of art that you are very, very personally attached to for whatever reason, but that doesn't fit the overall arc or theme or story that you're trying to tell. And so a great example of this is in Lord of the Rings, in the Fellowship of the Ring, in the book, the whole Tom Bombadil section. That section did absolutely nothing for the arc of the story. It was a complete aside and a complete tangent. Frodo and Sam are just sort of off having this weird sort of trippy experience with this dude. And then when they leave, it's done. He's never mentioned again. It doesn't impact anything. Peter Jackson, even though he personally loved that little aside, he realized that when it came time to make the movies, it didn't fit. And so that's a kind of a classic example of something where Tolkien at the time didn't have to kill his darling. And so it ended up in the book, but really it's something that doesn't fit. Now, the publishing industry has become so much more competitive than when Tolkien was writing. And so now if authors expect to break through in a traditional sense with an agent, or even if they just hope to have success in a very congested self-publishing market, it's really important, I think, to tell very lean, focused stories. And so that's why, for me, being able to kill your darlings is essential. Now, that's not something that a lot of people like to hear. And so whenever I talk about it, I always try to encourage them to think about their story holistically and to understand how each element fits together. And I think when we do that, a lot of times they can see, okay, maybe this character, even though I love him, doesn't actually work. Or I can combine him with another character to make a hybrid character that actually fits the narrative much better. So that's always a difficult sort of thing to cross. And so at least when I do my work, I'm not a critic, I'm a developmental editor. So I'm critiquing, but it's a slightly different approach. I really focus on education and enrichment for the author so that way they know why this criticism is happening and how they can fix it. Whereas, a critic on Amazon who just leaves a review, or, if your work is being professionally criticized in a magazine or anything like that, it's going to be a slightly different thing. They're not going to focus as much on enrichment and telling you why this isn't working. So it can be a brutal path for any artist to be able to navigate that, to be able to get that kind of feedback that they can actually take, and that's really actionable, because otherwise it can just be really dispiriting to get a bad review or sort of a deeper critique. And so to your first question, from my personal journey, my journey to being an editor, like most people who are professional editors, started with being an author myself. I started writing stories when I was 5 years old. It was a ridiculous send-up of Indiana Jones. It was like Indiana Jones meets Ghost Story. And it was almost incomprehensible. But the fact is, I sat down, I wrote an entire story at 5. My mom still has it. It's
I can't pull the money out of my wallet fast enough to read it. Like, I'd love to read it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. There were a lot of words were sounded out. We'll just we'll just put it that way. And then I ended up writing my first novel at 12. So it was a full, 350 page book. And it was essentially, out of the 350 pages, it was probably 280 pages of medieval combat. So, not exactly the most gripping read, but it was just one of these things. I loved sitting down at the computer and writing out these stories.
What fed that? I mean, to write 300 pages, I mean, for a child to write 12 pages is challenging.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that came from. My mom was an editor, and an English major, but she did like technical writing. So, I kind of got a little bit of that from her, but I think it was just something I was always pulled to. At the time, I felt like I would pick up a book, usually fantasy, and I'd read it. I'd get 50 or 100 pages in, and I wouldn't like the direction that it was going, and I'd be like, well, I could tell this better. And so I just felt like I wanted to tell the story that I wanted to read. And so, I was really into, gladiator and medieval combat. It's like Braveheart was one of my favorite movies. So I just was really into all that. And so I just wanted to just do it. But it was just kind of a native impulse. You can't force somebody to sit down and write a book that long at that age. Just like you can't force somebody to pick up a paintbrush or to be drawn to piano. I mean, you couldn't force me to sit down at a piano at that age. Yeah. But I could sit at a computer for hours and write a book. So I think it's just, we all have these sort of natural pulls that manifest in those early years. And, I'm really grateful that I had access to a computer so that I could do it. And that, I had support and encouragement. One sort of interesting thing in my journey, this is something I talk a lot about in my classes when I teach creative writing, is I had this sort of natural desire, but I was never really given a structure. I was never really taught how to write a novel. I wanted to write a novel. I had the stamina to write a novel, but I never was given the actual practical tools or structures to do it. And I think most aspiring authors go through this, and I don't know why. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's a failing of our educational system, but it's certainly a deficiency that we're not taught the actual mechanics of storytelling. We read all these classics and we can do analysis and all these things, but we're not actually being taught the mechanics of how to put together a story, and I don't know why. So as I got older and I continued writing and I continued kind of going through that process, I found myself hitting the same wall again and again and again, where I would write these long books, but the feedback that I was getting was really lukewarm, and it was very, very tepid, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why people weren't responding to my writing the way that I felt about it. And one of the most searing responses that I got, and it hurt me so much, but it was so valuable, is one of my very good friends read my entire novel, and this was in my early 20s, and he came back and said, it just didn't breathe. And for me, that was like, oh, and for anyone else, it's like that's not a bad criticism, but for me, it hit so deeply, because he was able to convey so much in such a small little knife, and yeah. It just got right in there. But I really needed to hear that, and that started my journey to unpack why.
Can I stop you for 1 second?
Oh, yeah, of course.
So there's a scripture that I think has a lot of wisdom in it, and it's the wounds of a friend are better than the kisses of an enemy.
Yeah, right. That's perfect. So that's
perfect. So I guess obviously that resonated with you in such a way that you were like, okay, there's a chasm I need to cross. I haven't gotten there yet. And it didn't discourage you. It hurt, but it encouraged you. So what did that do to your friendship, by the way?
Oh, yeah, that was actually totally fine.
Yeah, that's cool.
I'm very, very grateful that he was able to deliver what I needed to hear. Of course, he wasn't an expert in storytelling, so he couldn't break it down for me. But it started a journey for me to educate myself on all of these things that I didn't know. So there's a great sort of schema, and I don't know who came up with that in the first place. So I'm sure somebody online will say, oh yeah, this was so and so. But something that I picked up along the way, where anybody who's on the road to mastery we all start at a place where we're unconsciously incompetent. So that's where most aspiring authors are, through no fault of their own. That's if we're on the path to mastery, that's where we all start. And a lot of us can spend a lot of time in this unconsciously incompetent place. And then something like this happens where there's a defining moment where we move from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. And that's where most people quit. That's where most people realize, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm no good. I'm never going to get good. I should just throw in the towel now. And that's a very, very painful moment for any creative person. That's also the moment that I think we have to push through, and we have to reach out to a community. We have to find people who can help us educate ourselves and correct any deficiencies that we have in our craft. And so that's the hardest part of this entire journey, is realizing that, okay, we're consciously incompetent. But that is also where we start to really become a master. And then, we can move ideally to being consciously competent. And that's sort of the bread and butter. That's where you're really a journeyman, and you're living on your craft and you're doing it. And then obviously the goal is moving to the mastery stage, where you're unconsciously competent, where you've learned all the craft, you've mastered it, you've hammered out everything you need to know, and then you can forget it all. And that's when you get to break rules and you get to innovate and do all these things. And that doesn't necessarily have to happen over a lifetime. This could be compressed into a few years.
Right.
But it's, I think it's important to keep this pattern in mind anytime we're dealing with a creative process. So for me, my friend saying that was that moment where I realized my own incompetence, and I recognized I needed to do something about it.
So that it's, how old were you, would you say, when that happened?
Oh, I think I was 24.
Okay. So at that point, were you through college at that point?
Yeah, I was. And actually, I didn't study creative writing at all in college. I didn't even take an English class. And for me, I had been operating under this idea that you can't teach writing. So I had gone through all of college studying other things. I was really into philosophy and all this other stuff. But I was like, oh, you can't teach writing. And, it wasn't until later I was like, oops, well, actually you can. But again, it really depends on where you're getting that education. I had a young woman in one of my classes come to me afterwards and said that, she learned more in that 1 hour than she did in 4 years getting a Bachelor of Fine Arts in creative writing. And that to me was, obviously that's an honor to hear her say that, but that's also really heartbreaking for me, because I'm like, how can that happen? Like, how can somebody go through 4 years of creative writing school, but yet not actually talk about the mechanics of storytelling? And so that's probably a conversation for another time. But it's hard to see people, go through that. I have another friend who every time he talks about his creative writing degree, he always says, "And would you like fries with that?" This idea that just like, creative writing degrees are just, you throw your money away and you don't get anything out of it. And that really irks me. I wish it wasn't that way. And I'm sure that's not always the case. I'm sure there are people out there, probably people who are watching this, who might have creative writing degrees that got a ton out of it. But I've encountered a lot of people who were left pretty unenthused by their creative writing education.
It seems to me that across the creative mediums, whether it's acting, writing, directing, painting, whatever it is, there is a point for somebody who wants to pursue it professionally that they come to the end of an educational trail. I'm not saying they're done with education, like they're not going to, maybe they go back later and they learn some stuff from a university or some individuals or whatever it is, but you're led somewhere, and then you come to the end of the road, like the person who's led you there, or the group or whatever, they go, that I don't know what's down there, I don't know anymore. And then you've kind of got to pick up your own leash.
Yeah, exactly.
and you take charge of your education and your understanding about your craft. Like you were saying, you recognize your what did you say, your competence?
Yeah. So I went from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent.
Right. And being consciously incompetent, it doesn't feel great, but you've got some direction now.
Yeah.
And now you can start to climb that mountain, because it's a mountain, right? And you know, it
Absolutely.
may, like you say, it may not be a lifetime of a mountain. Maybe there's a portion of it you climb and it's like, okay, now I can really do stuff here. But then there's more down the road. So it seems like, you know, we were talking about our ages. So I'm 15 years older than you. I'm gonna be 50, you're 35.
Mhm.
And I think I started to come out of the generation where you would go to school, maybe you go to college, you'd get a job, you'd be set. That would be your job for life.
Right.
That started stopping in my generation,
Mhm.
and then something changed where people started to realize that there were other ways to do it.
Yep.
And now with the internet, there's just so many ways to do it. And I think that I don't know that the higher education system has caught up with that realization as fast. I could be
Yeah, yeah,
wrong. That's a thought.
yeah. I know, and I think you're absolutely right. I think there's still a huge value, at least I personally believe in, sort of the classic liberal arts education. There's something for me, it was so valuable to go to a 4-year school where I just was sort of free to dabble. And I was able to study so many different things in a really sort of wonderful, safe cocoon. It's a very expensive cocoon, and that's part of the issue is that, we all get saddled with,
Right.
this incredible amount of debt because, especially with, the classic liberal education, those tend to be private universities, and that's, very, very pricey. So I'm not saying I advocate for everybody to go that route, but even though it didn't prepare me for the career path I'm on now in terms of giving me the actual tools to do my craft, it provided an incredible foundation for me, an intellectual foundation for curiosity that really benefits me as a writer and an editor. I edit things across the entire spectrum, and I feel very comfortable working in any genre, fiction or nonfiction, and on across many, many different topics because I believe my education encouraged that curiosity at a very pivotal age for me. So I think what I'm trying to say is that even if you didn't go to a school specifically for your craft at a very young age, I still think, going through an enriching educational process will benefit you, even if later in life you realize that you didn't have the tool set that you needed for your specific craft. If you realize later in life that you really want to be a painter, but you didn't have any of the specific training at a young age, I wouldn't see that as a barrier. That's just one of those things that when you realize, the conscious incompetence, that you're like, okay, now I have to really dig deep and train. And then, I mean, there's some people who know what they want to do at a very young age and they pursue it very, very aggressively. And I think that's a wonderful path as well. But that's not the only path to success. You can kind of fumble your way through it, and then have an opportunity present itself. And then I think you raised an excellent point with the sort of digital world that we're living in now and all the opportunities that are present on the internet. There are so many different avenues now where a creative can find success and carve out a niche for themselves where they can do the thing that they love to do and get paid for it. It's not necessarily easy, but there are many, many opportunities now that there may not have been previously.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Right. And having your eye out for those opportunities, I think that's another layer of conscious incompetency, is when you can get to that point and go, wait, there are other ways. Now figure it out. How do I do this? How do I get from
Yep.
here to there? So we're at 24 years old. You have this epiphany because of your friend's dagger,
Yeah.
and so what was the next step for you?
Well, for me, it was actually a bunch of sideways steps. So at that time, I wasn't really on a career path. I was really into, of all things, organic agriculture. So I was living in California, and I was all about, working on farms and kind of doing the whole organic farming thing. And so that was just a very kind of chapter in my life. I was like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to write my novels, and that was just going to be my life. But then once all that kind of didn't work out, I was like, well, maybe I should reconsider. So I started looking at master's programs, and I was really, in college, I was really into philosophy and ethics. So I actually ended up looking for an ethics program. And at that time, I sort of thought that in the back of my mind, I was like, well, if I can't have success as a writer the way that I want, I should probably just go do something else. So I pursued a master's degree in ethics. I moved to Washington, D.C., and it was during the early stages of the Trump administration. And so it was a very interesting time to be in DC. There was a lot of turmoil, there was a lot of upheaval and all that. And so I was in this grad program, I was studying these things, I was doing a lot of work in the nonprofit space, and I was kind of living that DC lifestyle, and it didn't really do anything for me. I realized I was kind of barking up the wrong tree. And during that time, I decided to start editing on the side, just as a way to bring in some pocket money. So I had been the editor of my school newspaper. I'd been the editor of my university newspaper. I was the editorial director of my graduate journal. So I had this editorial background that came from just being a writer and being fascinated by words. And it just was something that I'd always had. It was a skill set that was just always there for me. So I just started editing on the side. And really quickly, I started to gain a lot of traction. Once I started to get some 5-star reviews and started to get a lot of positive feedback on the platform I was using, I started to realize that, hey, wait a second, I like doing this, and I'm really quite good at it. But I didn't really trust that I could do it full time. It took pretty much through the entire course of grad school, as I started working more and more and more, and I got more experience, and I was brushing up on my own editorial skills. When grad school ended, I had the decision to either go full time into my editing or pursue a PhD. And I looked at another 7 years of school, and I just was like, you know what? I do not have that in me. So I took the leap and decided to do what I had been doing part-time, just to say, okay, I'm going to do this full time. And it was very, very scary because I didn't know if the sort of freelancing thing could pan out. And I'm so glad that I made that leap, because it really showed me that this was a viable path, and that I was able to work in the area that I loved. I was able to work with authors to help craft their vision. And that was huge for me. So once I made that leap, that's when I realized that I could be on this path and make money doing it. So for me, it was really being able to find the platform that I used initially, which was called Fiverr, which is a big freelancing platform. So I just put up my page, and people started to come. And now, 6 years later, I think I've 1,500 5-star reviews or something like that. So it's,
On Fiverr, huh?
Yeah. So I've been able to get, quite a history there, which is really, really wonderful. But that whole journey
is
was.
that your main, by the way, is that your main connection?
It is, and it isn't. So Fiverr was really instrumental in sort of launching this side of my career. It's how I met Paul, for instance. He found me online, and my profile is there amidst all the other editors, but I think people resonate with the way I talk about it and the way I present it, and so that's how I met a lot of my clients early on. But then over time, I got a lot of repeat clients, I got a lot of referrals, and it really started to grow. And then just this year, at the beginning of 2021, a very, very dear friend of mine, who was also in the same grad program as me, also a phenomenal editor, I got him started on the freelancing path right around the same time, because we both saw the job market after grad school, and we were like, we need to find something else. And so he and I were sort of freelancing concurrently, but doing it separately. And then last year we decided to join forces, and we're launching an editorial agency called Duo Storytelling. So we both focus on the consulting and the education and the developmental editing. And then we have a team of editors who we've trained, who are doing a lot of the copy editing, a lot of the proofreading. So that way we can handle a really large volume of work, but still deliver really excellent results. So it's been amazing for me to have gone on this path where I was a freelancer to now, very much a business owner and sort of an entrepreneur in the space. And it's wonderful to be able to reach so many people, because there's a huge demand for editors who are conscientious and kind and can educate while they're critiquing. I think unfortunately I get a lot of people who come to me who say they've had horrible experiences with editors, that editors have derailed them from their dream, and that is the worst thing that an editor can do. And that's why I said earlier on, it's a sacred thing. At least I think it is, because a lot of damage can be done if an editor approaches it in the wrong way.
Almost have to imagine you're like a physical trainer, you know, like somebody gets hired to look after LeBron James, right? And probably he doesn't want to get into LeBron James headspace and say, you know what, you're taking too many threes, so let's work over here on this muscle grouping. It's like,
Yeah.
no. So you really have to be able to, I talk about reading the room a lot. You
Yep.
got to be able to read the client, the person. I guess
Exactly.
as a pun, you have to read their work, but
Yeah, yeah. You know,
right.
and it's very true. Yeah, there has to be a lot of sensitivity in the way that we handle it. And so it's something that I never thought I would be a developmental editor, but it's such a perfect fit for who I am and my skill set and what I love to do. And it's opened doors for me that I hadn't expected. And it's allowed me to bring my creativity into the business in a really cool way. And that's where my ghostwriting has come in. And actually my major ghostwrite that I just finished was a book called Parts Per Million. So it's available online now at partspermillionbook.com. It actually came through Paul. So I worked very closely with Paul on the first two books of his trilogy. He's working on the third now. And Paul actually put me in touch with another one of his close friends from Chicago, a retired ATF agent named Mitchell Weedo. And so Mitch and I were talking, and he had this incredible story that he wanted to tell about bomb detecting canines. So when he was in ATF, he trained these yellow labs to detect bombs, and then would take them all over the country doing this work. And his dog came from a litter of puppies that was born in a women's correctional facility, and were actually raised by an inmate in a program called Puppies Behind Bars. And so you had this litter
Wow.
of puppies that were raised, you know, in a women's prison that went on to do incredible service in the CIA, with Border Patrol, with the U.S. Marshals. And so he wanted to tell this story. He had all of these incredible anecdotes and all this incredible information, and he had written a short script, you know, like a movie treatment, and he wanted somebody to take it and novelize it, because writing a novel is a very different thing than writing a movie script, or telling these little anecdotes. And so for me, that was a wonderful exercise to take everything that I'd learned, to take all of the craft that I had mastered as an editor, and to actually apply it to writing a novel. And it was such a fun experience, because I had the bare bones and I had all the ideas in Mitch's head, and it was up to me to sit down and talk with him, and over the course of a year craft this story that was emotionally compelling and that had full developed arcs for 5 different characters, which was actually very, very hard. It was very hard to tell a story that had 5 main characters and 4 dogs, each kind of on these different arcs. And how do I weave that together and make it a compelling story that is cohesive, that touches on a central theme, but without being redundant? Because if every character had the same theme, you'd be like, okay, I get it, So it was a really, really cool exercise for me. And for me, it was the first time it had been 100% craft. When you're writing your own work, it's very personal. You have all these attachments, but in this case, it was strictly a craft expression, and I think it came out great. Mitch and I love the process, and the book. I'm very, very proud of it. I think it's an excellent read.
So now I'm absolutely fascinated by everything you just told me. How did ghostwriting come into play for you? Because it sounds like it came out of your editing, right? And that service to people.
Yeah, yeah. So I think from a very early age, my goal was always to be an author. So I was always open to that. Editing came around for me because it was a skill set that I had developed that was in very high demand. And so editing for me was always this thing that I wanted to offer, especially as I started to go through my internal process of realizing my own, conscious incompetence. Once I navigated that, I wanted to help others navigate that also. So that was really the impetus for my editing business. But I always had in the back of my mind that I would love to continue writing, but I didn't know how to monetize it. And so when Mitch reached out to me, he actually reached out to me asking for a referral to another ghostwriter. He said, you're an editor, you're in this business. Do you know any ghostwriters? And I didn't really know anyone who I think would be appropriate for that particular book. And so we were talking back and forth, and after a while I just said, hey, if you're open to it, why don't I give a crack at it? And Mitch was like, that sounds great, let's do it. And so it happened accidentally, but sometimes that's the best thing that happens in your career is these happy accidents that sort of put you on the path that you were always meant to be on. It just didn't quite happen the way that you had planned it. And
How
so
long
so for
ago
me,
was this that ghostwriting came into being?
yeah. So Mitch contacted me. Gosh, it was December of 2019.
Oh, so
And
very
so
recent.
yeah. So we spent most of 2020 working on the book, and then we published it right around Thanksgiving of 2020.
I mean, it's a very, very different process. It would almost like if I can get my head wrapped around it, it would be like somebody saying to me, "Hey, I want you to paint my mural." And this is what it is. It's this scene and this is over here and this character has this brow and it would have to come into focus over time, right? As I'm really learning to see with their eyes and then also for a writer, you've got to learn how to speak in their voice.
Yeah. So my personal genre that I love to write in is sci-fi fantasy. So very much akin to Star Wars. Has a little bit more of like a fantasy element to it. So that's my personal bread and butter. I absolutely love reading that genre. I love writing in that genre for my personal writing. But I'd never written a thriller. I'd never written this sort of crime drama type thing. So it was a very fun experience adopting another person's voice. And I think that's what's so cool about being a ghostwriter is that you do adopt another person's voice. You sort of follow their lead, but you don't become fully invisible. I mean, if we think about what a ghost is, it is invisible, but it's an animating force, right? So it's like it's the ghost inside the machine. So it's even though I was stepping into somebody else's voice, there was still so much of me that went into that story. It was just all behind the scenes. So when you're reading the words, it's the voice and tone that Mitch was going for, but there was so much of me that I poured into that, and that was a really 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 cool experience. And I think we ended up with a story that was very very close to Mitch's original script treatment, but there were all these other elements that were completely unexpected that came through the creative process, and a lot of that happened on the emotional level for the various characters. I when I started the process, Mitch had the outline, and I sat down with him and I asked him, okay, if you could pick 3 words that you would say summarize this book, what would they be? Because I needed some structure. I needed parameters to know how to approach this process. I had my craft, I had my process that I had developed through editing that I felt very confident on and that I was teaching on and I was working with authors on in that capacity. But now it's time for me to actually apply it myself. So I said, I need some parameters. And so I asked him what his 3 words were. And he said that he wanted it to be page turning, heartwarming, and informative. And I was like, okay, I can work with that. So I knew that I needed to make sure that I was working with quick chapters that were very engaging for the reader. I knew that I needed to bring a lot of emotional resonance for the characters. And I knew that I needed to weave it together in such a way that the reader was left with a very, heartwarming feeling at the end. And especially when you're working with dogs, that's sort of a natural thing anyway. So that one was a good match. And then also informative, that was an interesting one to weave in because Mitch obviously is a 25-year expert in the ATF and he's a wealth of knowledge, and he wanted the reader to be educated on the process of what it's like raising a bomb dog and then actually having them in the field. And so it was really cool to have those 3 sort of guiding lights as I was working through the process. And so for me, that was pivotal to be able to know where I could pour my creativity, where I could put my spin on it while still staying true to his goals.
It's pretty
So
cool. I don't know why, but like a trapeze act came to mind where
right.
where it's a high wire and you can't function without the other. You need the partner.
Yep.
And there's times where you're launched in the air and you don't have the answer except you got to catch that partner's hands.
Yeah,
And so I'm
that's
certain that he felt like that at times where he's
oh,
like,
absolutely. I mean, he took a big leap, you know, to be able to say, okay, take this idea and run with it. And so what we did is we did an iterative process where I would send him each chapter after I finished it, and he would come back to me, and we would go back and forth. And you know, there were a lot of times when I would just make stuff up about like, I don't know what a cop would do in this instance, so I just make it up. And sometimes you'd be like, dude, you got this so wrong. We would never do that. But then other times he was like, how did you know this? Like
yeah,
I've never served as a customs border patrol officer, but I wrote a chapter that like captured it perfectly. And he was like, have you ever chased a fugitive through the Texas desert? And I was like, nope. But you know, I was able, so it's like in some ways I was way off, in some ways I really hit the nail on the head. And so that's why we had to build trust. We had to build this rapport to be able to go back and forth over the course of 10 months. You
yeah.
know, so it was a big commitment on both of our ends. But the final product I think is really, really phenomenal. So it was a great
Sounds like
experience. It was a perfect marriage for me of my professional craft and my personal creativity. And I think that's the goal, right? If you're a working creative, that's what you want. You know, you want to find something where it can support you professionally, but also gives you the latitude to have your own creative process.
when did you feel like you were over that financial hump in your business where you're like, okay, I can make this happen?
Yeah, so that for me was really at the end of grad school. So I'd been freelancing for 3 years at that point, and it again had been a side business, but I kept getting bigger and bigger projects, and I kept getting more and more traction, and more people were sort of looking to me to be their editor. And so I was at that moment where I was like, okay, do I go to the PhD route? Do I just go into, you know, find a job at an NGO, or do I do this editing thing? And I looked at the numbers and I was like, you know what? I don't think I can make it with the rates I'm charging now. And so I did research and I realized that I was charging very, very, very low rates in terms of what editorial freelancers charge. And so I was like, okay, I have 3 years under my belt. I have all these five-star reviews. I've done all this research. You know, I've done a tremendous amount of studying. I think I can take this step to reach, you know, a real professional level. And so I raised my rates, and it was terrifying because I had no idea what was going to happen. And my business took off. I got more work than ever before. And you know, so that was a really valuable lesson for me, that when you're charging for your creative work, I think the first instinct is to charge low, because we may be feeling like, oh, you know, maybe I don't have as much experience as someone else, or maybe I'm not as good, or, you know, all these different things. And sure, I think there's a phase where if you're just getting started and you know, you're building your track record, I think charging low rates is perfectly acceptable. But there is a point at which you have to really say, okay, I am a professional. I do know what I'm doing, and I have worth. I'm providing value to my customers, to my clients, and clients respond to that. You know, I think it's not about taking them over budget, but I think it's about recognizing that if you're offering a service and if you're an expert, you can charge a rate that is commensurate with your expertise. And I found that I got more work, and the work I got was sort of higher quality, in the sense that I've started to work with people who were really committed to the process, who loved learning, who were adamant that they, you know, wanted to get these books published. And it really took my business to the complete next level. And once that happened, once I made that leap, I saw that, okay, this is very viable. That this is my professional path. This isn't just a side job. This is something that I can pursue. And then over the last 2 years, I've seen that I can grow it tremendously, because there's so much demand, and I was getting to the point where I couldn't keep up with the amount of work that was coming in. And so that's why my business partner Jesse and I decided to team up and train other editors so that we could have this really wonderful team, so that we could handle all of the work that was coming in while still maintaining a really high level of quality and a really high level of personal touch. Because again, nobody wants to send it to just like send their manuscript to just some random editing company and it just gets, you know,
Right.
cranked through the mill and out it comes. You know, there needs to be a relationship between client, you know, between author and editor.
Yeah, absolutely. What does Jesse bring to the table? Are you guys do you have similar talents, skills, or
Yeah. So the direction where I'm taking my specific skill set is I'm really focusing on fiction storytelling. So novel writing, that's where I really, really love to work. And absolutely love working in a developmental capacity with fiction authors so that we can work on their craft. So I do a lot of teaching on our website. I've developed a series of courses One of the big ones is called the Art and Craft of Storytelling. So it's like a 24 module course where I go through the entire spectrum of storytelling. And it's, to me, it's so transformative because it gives authors all of the tools they need to overcome the blocks that they're encountering. Because again, as we said, a lot of authors are in that unconsciously incompetent phase. And so this course was designed to sort of fill in all of the gaps that a storyteller might have so that they could actually craft the novel that they want. So that's something that I'm incredibly drawn towards. Jesse's very skilled in that as well. And he has really wonderful expertise in nonfiction. And so he really is taking that piece. I love working in nonfiction. I do it a little bit, but he's definitely the expert in that. And he also, I think, technically is a better editor than I am. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of the Chicago Manual of Style, which for any writer or editor is like the Bible. That's the guiding light for how we do all of our work. And for people who've seen it, I mean, it's a huge book. It's massive. And so he is really wonderful. So he's taking on more of the operations side. So he's working really closely with all of our editors, training them up and managing all of the work that's coming through. And then I'm focusing on the really deep work on a developmental level with fiction authors. So it's kind of cool. We kind of have our two different skill sets that marry really well for this new venture.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then your editors that the both of you hire on, are they subcontractors?
Yeah, so for now we're doing like subcontracting arrangements. So they're all U.S. based. They all have a lot of experience, and then we train them on our particular style. So we use the Chicago Manual as our bedrock, but then we have particular things that we really like to see. And a big thing is training them on how to engage with the readers. So ideally, when a book comes in, we go through multiple rounds and it'll be touched by multiple editors through the whole process. So Jesse and I are kind of like the main people, but then we have other people in there as well. And so we want to make sure that anybody who has eyes on a book or is giving feedback has the same approach that we have, where it's very educational, it's very supportive. And so that's really important to bring them on and train them up. So for this year, we're focusing mostly on doing subcontracting, but if we continue to have the growth that we've had over the last year, we may get to a point where we want to bring them on as full employees. So, we're at
Sure.
this really kind of cool moment where, we're launching things and we're seeing how it takes shape. So it's a really, really fun experience to not only be in a creative profession, but now to kind of be taking an entrepreneurial spin on how to provide this service. Because at the moment, the self-publishing industry is booming. There's so many people out there who have a story that they want to tell, and a lot of people need that extra support.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Um, what's next for you? Is it more ghostwriting? Is it you're growing this business, this partnership, and then is the online course in that umbrella? Is it under that too? It's all
Yeah.
together?
So exactly, yeah. So our website is called duostorytelling.com. So that's DUO storytelling. And so that's where we're offering all of our services, and that's also where we have all of our courses. Yeah, so for me, this next year, it's really about building out our course offerings. So the Art and Craft of Storytelling course, it's very, very in-depth, but I cover a wide spectrum. And I also really love to go very deep into specific elements of storytelling. So later in the year, I'm also going to be offering seminars where it's a small cohort, maybe 4 or 5 authors, and we get together and we share our writing and we workshop it very intensively in this tight-knit group, focusing on a specific element of storytelling, whether that's point of view, whether that's working with themes, whether that's working with story arcs. So basically, we can take our existing writing and go really, really deep with it, and we can provide tailored feedback within that group, because I think that's so important to be able to work with other authors and get that kind of feedback. So the goal would be, to have people go through the Art and Craft of Storytelling course to kind of understand the language of creative writing, to understand the full spectrum of what it takes to craft a really excellent novel. And then later on in the seminar work, go really deep in a small cohort with other authors so that we can share our work and get that really granular feedback. Because I think that's very, very important. It's one thing to take a class that's more like lecture based and learn all that information, but to really go deep with other authors is I think that's where we really, really grow.
Indeed. Yeah. So you've really come full circle. You came through school after having been a youngster really interested in writing and storytelling, and then you had an awareness come about you, and you realized as you're passing through school, at college, university, we'll say, that nobody's really teaching the parameters around storytelling, right?
Yeah,
And so here you go, and you find a way to practically apply your skills, your storytelling skills, your editing skills, to earning an income
yeah,
that has since turned into a business. It's turned into several businesses, really,
yeah,
under this one. It's education, it's editing, it's ghostwriting, and and you're learning more and more every day, I'm sure, about running a business and all that goes into
absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
And now you've been able to craft these courses that are going to help to put parameters around storytelling.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So one of my favorite metaphors, and I talk about this in my sort of intro class that I have up on there. It's the like the free course to kind of introduce people to how I think about things. The metaphor that has always spoken to me is this image of a lantern, and inside the lantern you have a flame. And so what I see the flame as is that's our spark of inspiration. That's this idea that comes to us in the middle of the night that won't let go. It's this thing that overwhelms us. It's the artistry. It's this ephemeral thing that we can't understand, and it just comes out of us. But it's fickle and it's delicate. And if you don't have a lantern around it, that flame can get
Hmm.
snuffed out. And so for me, the structure of storytelling is that lantern. It's a structure that allows you to protect this really incredible flame of inspiration that strikes. So when it does strike, you have something to put it inside. And then from there, you can take that lantern and shine light all over. It becomes this illuminating force as opposed to this fickle flame that could get blown out. And I think all artists feel that. We have these flashes of inspiration, but if we don't have anywhere to put it, we can lose it. And that, I think, is the worst fate that can befall anybody who has that creative drive. So that's why I really advocate structure in storytelling. But I also tell all my clients and all my students that we shouldn't focus on the structure as the ultimate end. It's just there to serve us and our creativity. So it's important to learn these rules. It's important to learn the structure of storytelling. But then once you have it under your belt, you can start to dismantle it. You can start to do things in your own way, and you can start to break the rules, but at least you're doing it consciously. You're doing it in a way where you're very intentionally telling a story that sort of changes some of the conventions. And it's the same thing in painting. We look at Van Gogh, or we look at Picasso, and we see masters in their fullness, but we don't realize that they were technically proficient in everything else that went up to that before they launched in their new innovative groundbreaking thing. So they broke all the rules, but before they broke the rules, they learned the rules. And I think that's so important. And I think in creative writing especially, there's this idea that there are no rules. And so you can just sit down and write, and just whatever comes out is going to be how it is. And the result is a lot of manuscripts from aspiring authors that need work, need help. And if they do sell them, they may get reviews that don't feel so good. So
Yeah.
that's why I really want to help authors, traverse this this path towards mastery.
Well, those parameters help to contain, grow, and then amplify mastery,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that's why I know I brought up LeBron James earlier. I like sports. I'm a
Yeah.
Jordan guy,
Ooh,
but
nice.
he's been out for a while. But there's moments where, and you had talked about this, where you don't have to think about mastery anymore. And if you're dribbling in and you're LeBron James and you do a crazy spin and you jump up and you go to dunk, but then you switch hands and Well, that's also a Jordan move. But
Yeah.
you do that. It's just
Jordan did
something
it first.
it's just something that happens because of the mastery and the excellence.
Yeah.
And I think I think that sometimes people confuse rules. Like rules get mixed in with perfectionism,
Yeah.
and then you get stuck and
Oh,
trapped,
absolutely.
and you can't do what it is you're made to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, anytime you get caught in shoulds, that's really going to stifle your creativity. And so structure doesn't need to entail shoulds. The structure is just there to provide guidance. It's to provide direction. uh, it's for me, there's so many different metaphors that we can go. I mean, if we look at, driving on the road, the road has lines, it has lanes, there's structure there. But what that does is it allows you to go so many different places. If we didn't have roads, we'd be screwed. Like, we wouldn't be able to get anywhere. So it's like we have these roads, and yes, they do provide structure and they do provide boundaries, but it enables us to go so much further than we would otherwise. And so I think if we think about structure in a different way, if we don't think about it in terms of shoulds or right and wrongs, but if we think about it in terms of opportunities or guidance, then it enables us to go the places that we want to go. And I think for me, anytime that I see an author who's stuck, I encourage them to look at the structure, to ask themselves, okay, where are you in your plot arc? What is happening in your protagonist's journey? What is their motivation? What is their goal? Where are they in their lie? Every good protagonist has a lie that they believe about themselves or the world at the start of the book or at the start of the movie. It's really, really critical because that informs the rest of their journey. Your protagonist is always going to transform from the beginning of the book or movie to the end. They can transform positively if you want to tell a happy ending story, or they can transform negatively if you want to tell a tragedy. But they have to change. The exception is you can tell a story where the protagonist doesn't change. It's called a flat arc. But you almost only find that in superhero movies. Wonder Woman is the same at the beginning of the movie as she is at the end. Superman doesn't change. He's always Superman. But what happens is they encounter doubt. They encounter something that challenges their sense of themselves or the sense of their power, and they have to overcome that challenge. But they're still the same. They haven't changed. They just had to go through a bunch of crap to kind of get back to where they were at the beginning. Uh, so when people are stuck, I always ask them, where's your protagonist on this journey? Where are they in their arc? And I think a lot of times people say, I have no idea. And to me, that's why they're stuck. They're stuck because they're trying to take their protagonist on a journey, but they have no direction in mind. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes you just drive randomly and you get to where you want to go. But sometimes you end up at a weird gas station out in the middle of nowhere and it doesn't feel very good and you want to get out of there. So having a sense of direction of where your characters are going is really valuable. So if you're stuck, that's where I always kind of look to first. And a lot of times that breaks the blockage, that gets things flowing. And then all of a sudden, the author can get to where they, really get to where they want to go. So for me, structure provides the keys to sort of open up the whole storytelling experience. That's not for everybody. There are some people who abhor structure and don't want it at all, and I think that's totally fine. I say more power to you. But from my experience in my own writing and then working with my clients, structure has been transformative.
Ooh, that's really good. As we wrap up, I just want to ask you, Keith, what like parting words of advice or wisdom might you have for the creative who wants to make a living from their craft?
Yeah, I think I have, two pieces of advice, and I've covered them before, but I'll just briefly touch them again. When you hit that realization of conscious incompetence, that is the pivotal moment to not stop. And no matter what your media is, no matter what type of art you do, that is really the defining moment. And it's going to happen again and again and again. Because on the path to mastery, we may master one aspect of our art, of our craft, but there may be other things that we're still deficient in. So it's not like we cross that threshold just once and then it's all sunshine and roses. We have to go through that process again and again. And anytime we hit that barrier, I think it's so important just to recognize what that step is and to not be discouraged, because I think that's where so many artists either stop or they lose their their passion, they lose their belief in themselves. And I think if you're aware of what that moment is, you can navigate it and get to the other side. The other thing that I would recommend, just from my own personal experience, is just to be open to exploring avenues that you don't expect as far as generating revenue from your art. I never thought that I would have become a professional editor, and I never thought that being a professional editor would open the door to doing ghostwriting and getting paid to do my creative work. So my journey to making money from doing the thing that I love to do didn't look the way I expected it. But at each stage, I was open to things that seemed scary, but that actually turned out to be a really wonderful opportunity. And especially now in this digital age, there are so many different avenues that you can take your creative process to monetize it. So if you're an artist, a lot of people will pay you really, really good money on platforms like Fiverr to create logos for them, or to do brand design, or to do any number of things, on my off time, just to, kind of complete my full nerd bona fides. I love playing Dungeons and Dragons. And we have contracted our group that we've hired artists to create, little scenes for us to bring our stories to life. So, I mean, right there, that's somebody who is making money because a bunch of people playing Dungeons and Dragons want custom art. So that's just one little example, but these are people who are able to monetize their art. So I just encourage you to look at what really inspires you, what you're really passionate about, and then trust that on one of these platforms, there's somebody who wants to give you money for what you're already doing, what you already love. So I would encourage you to put yourself out there and look for those opportunities.
Great advice. Where can people find you, Keith?
Yeah, so the best way to find me is at our new website, which we just launched at the beginning of January. So that's duostorytelling.com. That's DUO. And you can reach me there. The email is create@duostorytelling.com. And on that same website, you can also find all of my online courses. So that would be a great place to start to sort of understand how I approach storytelling and the whole process. So I have a course that I'm launching, my Art and Craft of Storytelling course. I think I haven't quite set the exact date, but it's going to be sometime in the middle of February. I'm going to be doing my next round of that. So it's a great opportunity for anybody who's interested in how to tell a story. And even if you're not writing a novel, it still lends itself very well. I'm actually going to be teaching another class here with an art school called the School of Visual Philosophy, where we're going to be talking about how to translate narrative storytelling into storytelling in visual media. So for sculptors, for instance, how do you tell a story with a figure that is motionless? So there's all sorts of different ways that you can take storytelling. Once you understand the mechanics, you can apply it across any creative media.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much, man. Thanks for being my guest.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Keith, thank you so much for being my guest. Keith is a really cool guy. We've kept in touch since the episode, and we just are chatting about art in general, about words and about visuals and about storytelling. I love storytelling. I love to watch a good movie. I love to read a good book. And I love how storytelling can come through in my visuals. So I encourage you to go visit duostorytelling.com. And, you can take Keith's free course. You can sign up for other courses. If you need any help with a book that you are writing and you'd like a ghostwriter to work with you, or you need an editor, I think you know where to go. I particularly like in Keith's story how he was looking for an opportunity to earn, and he knew that he had this incredible skill set in regard to editing and writing, and that he hopped on Fiverr. I've examined Fiverr just a little bit, and I think it's pretty spectacular that he has made a living off of Fiverr, that he has found his way and his pricing, because I had kind of assumed that Fiverr was just all low prices, but apparently it is not. So, there are all ways to work different systems, and I would encourage you to find the system that works for you. And if it is, say, Fiverr or Redbubble or you know, anything else, Etsy, and it works for you, and you're earning, and it's all good. That's pretty stupendous, and I just love that he has built his business on top of that, and that he has worked it out with his partner to kind of divvy up specialties and go after fiction and nonfiction. Although they can cover uh, all the ground, it sounds pretty cool to be able to settle into whatever your special giftedness is and your particular area of interest, because you're just going to do better work when you're able to work on things that are maybe a bit more interesting to you. Okay. I mean, work is work. You know, we've all got to eat our vegetables, but sometimes you get a little bit more lobster on the plate, or pick your food of choice if you don't like lobster. Maybe it's chocolate covered strawberries, and you're going to eat a load of those. And God bless you. I'd like to eat those too. And the other thing that I really liked about Keith's journey is when Paul's friend got in touch with him to look for essentially a ghostwriter, and nobody really came to mind for Keith. Keith jumped in. He said, "You know, I might be able to do this. Do you mind if I have a crack at that?" And there you have it. Like, he said, "Yeah, let's do it." And it worked out so very well for all parties involved. So I would encourage you, if there's something maybe you haven't done and somebody is looking to have that thing done that you have never done before, but it falls into your skill sets and your interests, maybe that's a new area of work for you. So I encourage you, don't be shy, and maybe take that chance and jump in and give it a shot. So very, very cool things from Keith, and I'm looking forward to watching his business grow. And with that being said, that is it for this week's episode. I encourage you to pick an area this week in which you need to grow, an area that is going to help you to excel by leaps and bounds over that next plateau. Because, you know, there's times where we've all got to take that next step, right? And I don't know what that next step is, but either it's something that is very difficult, or maybe it's something we don't even know or understand what it is yet. So I'd encourage you to go after it and pursue it. And once you find it, go after it hard. It may be uncomfortable. It may be a little bit painful. It may be very painful, but go do it. I don't know if that means going to get a coach. I don't know if it means enrolling in a course. I don't know if it means buying some new equipment. I was just talking with somebody earlier who's interested in tattooing, and I suggested that they might want to look into prices of tattoo guns and a setup to see what would go into it, and do they have liability that they need to look out for, where they're at, what are the licensing and all the other issues that go into that. And what we found is it's actually a little bit cheaper to get involved in than what he may have initially suspected. So it's just cool to go digging and see what is the next step. So, on behalf of the Breakthrough Creative, I am your host, John McDavitt. If you think there are any guests that might be really good for the show, or if you have any questions for me, you can email me at john@thebreakthroughcreative.com. And I look forward to seeing you next week, my creative friends. See you later. Bye.